Hello everyone, Desert Mermaid here on my reading channel, Desert Mermaid Reads. I am currently reading out of the hardware catalog, full of lovely articles clipped by the fabulous Bertha E. Batt of North Tonawanda, which is in Western New York. I am actually going through and reading articles out of the book. I was going to try to read every one, but you know what? If somebody's going to win this, you've got to have some surprises. So I'm not going to read every single one. I'm going to flip through and read. There's probably going to be like 2 or 3 more in this series, and then I will be giving the book away. If you are interested in one of the people that would like to win the book, please send me an email at 716desertmermaid@gmail. It's in the description down below. You can just copy and paste it from there. In the subject line, please put hardware catalog raffle, and then I'll need your name and I'll need your address. I'll be doing the drawing when I return from Hawaii. I have 2 trade shows and I have a trip to Hawaii coming up. So I'm a little bit busy for the next 3 weeks. So we're looking about mid-September. So about a month from now, this book will be raffled off, and I hope you get to be the winner. I have a bunch more things to read, don't you worry, and a lot of them in the same genre. So I have some great magazines coming from the early 1900s. I have some myself. I also have some fabulous noir that were inserts in papers from like the 1930s and 40s to read. I have quite a few things, but if you have something that you would like me to read, I'd be happy to do it. So feel free. My address is down below. Send it away and I will fit it in. I'm hoping to have some more really fun, interesting readings. I'm hoping to get this to be more, have it going like, something dropping every 2 days or so, okay? So anyway, let's get to it. It's called A Wedding Garment by J.L. Harbour. Those who know me well enough to forego all feeling of delicacy and reserve in regard to the matter often tell me that I am one of the thinnest young men they ever saw. When I walk the streets, I'm often grieved by the remarks of a certain class of small boys who have not had proper home training. These remarks are of a comparative nature, I being one subject of comparison, and the lamppost by which I am walking, the other. Goodness! If I go 10 blocks without hearing anything about beanpoles and living skeletons, I am glad. Being just 6 feet tall does not add to the beauty of my appearance. I confess to a certain degree of vanity regarding my personal appearance, and when I made the blissful discovery that I was about to be married, I gave no little thought to the appearance I should present on an occasion when more than at any other time in my life so many persons would be gazing upon me. I read books on etiquette to see if, under any circumstances, a man could be married wearing his overcoat and 2 suits of clothing, but I found that this was allowable only in cases of elopement, and as my betrothed has set her heart on a church wedding, with everybody in full evening dress, I gradually forced myself to the conviction that the overcoat and 1 suit of clothes would have to be discarded. Now a man of my build looks positively and irredeemably awful in the conventional, clinging, lightweight cloth of which the usual wedding suit is composed. When I saw myself thus arrayed, I was convinced that there was, after all, something in the Darwinian theory, but as there was no help for it, I was married in the garments best calculated to make my attenuation glaringly apparent. After our marriage, my wife and I went immediately to a far distant western city in which we made our home. I was too poor to throw or to give away my detested wedding garments, but I soon reduced them to a state of great shabbiness by wearing them under my overcoat when about my daily work as a newspaper reporter. We were not society people, and I had no idea that I would ever again really need a suit of that kind. One day when I went home to dinner, my wife said, "See here, Tom, it is a shame for you to be wearing that handsome suit out in this way. Don't you suppose that you could sell it and get some cheaper and more suitable clothes for everyday wear?" I here take occasion to say that my wife is a very economical as well as a very practical and sensible woman. Sometimes I think, without telling her so, that she knows more than I do. I told her that I would think about her suggestion. A wise man will never come into immediate accord with the opinions of his wife. It is always best to hang back and pretend that you have a little sense of your own, even though you know you have not. Therefore, although I at once recognized the good sense of this suggestion and mentally resolved to profit by it, I said that I would think about it. At 12 o'clock that night, as I was closing my desk at the office preparatory to going home, the managing editor of my paper said, "See here, Dixon, that report you wrote of the trouble up at the Crystal Bell mine was uncommonly well done and will sell lots of papers and be talked about tomorrow. I think that I can get your salary raised on the strength of it. In the meantime, here is something to show you that the paper appreciates good work." As he spoke, he handed me a crisp, new $50 bill. He was rich, the paper was making a great deal of money, and I felt that I was not being paid all that I earned, so I took the money without any hesitation. $50 bills were very scarce at our house, and I fancied my wife's pride and pleasure when I should tell her of my good fortune on the morrow. For perfect security, I folded the bill until it was about an inch square, tucked it down into the watch pocket of my trousers, a pocket I had never before used, and one that few men clothed in their right minds ever use at all. I agree, those tiny pockets are a pain. Before morning, I was awakened by a great fire in a distant part of the city, and hastily donning an old suit that I kept for just such occasions, I hurried out to get a good report of the fire. We got out an extra, and it was late in the afternoon when I reached my home. As I entered the house, my wife held up a $10 and $5 bill, said triumphantly, "There, my dear, you have that much to pay on a suit that will do you some good. You do not know what a manager you have married. While you were away today, I sponged and pressed and gasolined your wedding suit until it looked almost as good as new, and old Isaacs, the dealer in second-hand clothing, gave me $15 for it. Wasn't that lovely?" "Mary Jane," I said. It was the first time I had ever called her by her full name, and she turned as pale as I was. "Did you, Mary Jane, look in all the pockets of that suit?" "Why, yes, Tom," she said, reassured. "In all of them?" I asked again. "Yes, in all, I'm certain." "In that wretched, miserable, useless, deceptive thing they call a watch pocket?" "Why, no, Tom, I didn't suppose that one ever carried anything but a watch in that pocket, and She heard what I said under my breath, burst into tears, and sat down with her apron over her face. I stalked into another room, banged the door very hard. I opened it softly in 2 minutes and a half, and well, we made it all up again, although we were very sober over our loss. My wife said that she would do without a great many things that she never did do without, and I said meekly and untruthfully that I suppose it was all for the best. To make matters a little worse, I drew a large, elegant-looking square envelope from my pocket and said to my wife, "And here is an invitation to the much-talked-of Smythe Durrant wedding next week, and I really would have liked to have gone. I have known Helen Durrant all of her life, and I like her as much as I dislike that snob of a George Smythe she's going to marry." "I am so sorry," said my wife contritely. "And here you might have gone to the wedding as well as not if I had not sold your only black suit. It is too bad. I could have worn my wedding dress, and we would have made a very good appearance. It is too bad." She began crying again. I said I would go away and never come back if she did not stop. Suddenly she jumped up and said excitedly, "Why, Tom, how foolish we are! It isn't at all likely that old Isaacs has sold that suit yet, and it may be that he hasn't looked into the pockets. Let us hurry right down and buy it back. We can tell him that there was a mistake in selling it, as there truly was. Let us hurry off." We reached the uninviting store of B. Isaacs, dealer in second-hand and misfit garments, in about 15 minutes, but the suit was gone. "I have just sold it in no more as 3 minutes and a half ago. It was not worth much, and it makes me no money on that suit. I would not fit a man that weighs anything at all." Okay. I raced angrily out of the store. "Well," I said as we walked moodily homeward, "I'm not the only 100-pound 6-footer in this town. That's evident. I'll just keep my eye on the other living skeletons, and if I find one who has my trousers, I'll have them back again in some way." I kept a sharp lookout for lean men the next week, and was gratified to discover that there were 15 or 20 as lean as myself in the town, but all of them were save the humiliation of being told they had on my trousers, a humiliation that might not have been lessened by the offer of $25 I was willing to make for them, and the $50 bill. As the evening of the wedding drew near, our desire to attend it increased, and at last I said to my wife, "Well, I cannot afford to get me another expensive black suit that I might not need for years, but we can at least go to the church. I can wear my new business suit and my overcoat to the church if we do not find the man who has my clothes." We didn't find him. We went to the church that we might be among the first there, and our lack of festive garments less noticeable. If it wasn't for Helen, I would not have come at all. I said to my wife as we sat in the church, I cannot endure that man Smythe. He thinks himself so superior to everyone else, and he is a perfect snob. He makes me tired with all his twaddle about best society and the exclusive set in which he moves, and this sort of a wedding is perfectly absurd for a man in his circumstances. The fellow's salary is only $20 a week, and Helen's people are poor, so I don't see who is to pay the fiddler. Am I as long and lank and lean as Smythe? And do you think... Shh, whispered my wife. They are coming. Down they came in the broad center aisle, 5 bridesmaids with gorgeous pink and blue and cardinal and lavender and lemon-tinted trains, 5 ushers, and last of all, Helen in yards and yards of white satin and soft lace and tulle, and Smythe in. I clutched at my wife's arm and almost hissed in her ear, that man is on my clothes, just as sure as you are a living woman. Mary Jane gave me an admonishing poke in the side with her fan and softly whispered, keep still. No, my dear, I said as we walked home after the ceremony, I am not mistaken. Those were my clothes. I would know those trousers if I saw them on a Hottentot. Didn't you smell the gasoline when he walked by our pew? I did. And to think that I cannot go to the swell wedding of the season because the bridegroom has on my clothes. But if I had gone, he would have been compelled to have stayed at home, wouldn't he? Lean as we are, we both couldn't have worn those. How perfectly ridiculous you are, interrupted Mary Jane. I do not feel at all sure that they were your clothes. And if they were, how are we to get the $50 bill? We did not get it at all, and I have an idea that Smythe found it, and then he paid for my clothes with my money. I gave old Isaacs 25 cents for telling me that he had really sold the suit to Smythe, and a look of mortal agony came into the old Hebrew's face when I told him about that $50 bill. I don't know what to say about that one. Here's the next story. Pleasing his mother. We all know how much fun some people have with in-laws. I hope Jeffrey Parker doesn't feel like that. My family's pretty crazy. My parents sadly have passed away, but he is part of the boys. My brother and my brother-in-law, we call them the Drunkles, and Jeffrey Parker fits right in, just like one of them. They're 3 peas in a pod, those boys. So I'm happy about that. Maud, dear, I'm so glad to see you. Perhaps I do look a little blue, but it's so hard to please everyone. Yes, it's Mrs. Benson. I mean, it's Mother. But one has to try to please a mother-in-law, for she, being older, can't afford to waste her time trying to please you. She isn't pleased with my way of marketing, and you know that I never did any before I was married. Only yesterday I wanted something extra nice because Mrs. Benson, Mother, was visiting us, and I asked the butcher for some mincemeat. He said they didn't keep it and suggested trying the delicatessen store. To cover my mistake, I looked at my list and said, oh, yes, it was sweetbreads I wanted. I suppose they were at the delicatessen, too. But he had them. They looked so different from anything I'd ever eaten. Maybe it was because I had never seen them before they were cooked. Anyway, the bill was awfully high, and because they didn't look inviting, I just gave them to the janitor's wife. George laughed about it, but Mrs. Mother said it was very extravagant. I made a delicious pudding, a custard sponge cake. The custard part was lovely, but the sponges were so tough. I must have got the wrong kind. Mrs. Mother looked so injured that I left the table and went into the kitchen to cry, and George, he's so sympathetic, came right out to help. He didn't cry. When his mother came into the kitchen, she looked around in a superior way and said she didn't see that we had done much tidying up, though we had been gone so long. Of course, after that, George didn't offer to help, but went right into the other room, and our mother said she would wipe the dishes. I felt all choked up, you see. I hadn't had a chance to kiss George before he went into the parlor. And he had been gone all day. His mother doesn't think it dignified to do that way. She never did, I should think not. Then there was more trouble. I offered her a nice dish towel, one that I had hemstitched myself, and she fairly snorted. When you have been married a little longer, you will be willing to economize and use flour sacks for dishcloths, as I do. I'll get some, I said. What do they cost? But this proved the wrong thing to say. She pulled herself up proudly and answered, nothing. They come with flour. Right. Then I made up my mind to please her because I really want her to like me. So I went to the market, told the grocer I wanted some flour. He asked how much. I said I needed a 6 sacks, but perhaps 3 would do. Flour isn't likely to go up said he. Yes, it must, I told him. I live in the top flat. Send it right over, please. I didn't have anything to put the flour in so that I could get the sacks, and I haven't discovered yet what I can use the flour for, but I can use some of it for paste. George has so many newspaper clippings. George came home early, for he knew that his mother was shopping and that she wouldn't leave as long as there was a store open. I told him to come and empty the flour, and when he saw it, he laughed like a goose. Where can we put it? I asked tearfully. He looked around and then rushed to the laundry tubs. One of these will do. It's the only thing big enough, he said. I told him that the woman would have to have it. I told him that the woman would have to have it to wash it, although I thought him very clever to think of using it for the flour. She must do with the other tub for her small washings, George answered. I was so pleased at his ingenuousness that I hugged him just then his mother came in, and there stood the flour. She wasn't pleased. You told me that this was the way you did, I ventured. Not at all. I saved the sacks as we used the flour. But we haven't been married long enough to use. Why, I hadn't bought any flour before this. I just borrowed a cupful. I'm afraid she will never approve of George's marriage. Wow, that's pretty interesting, right? You don't even think about things like that, like those big giant flour sacks and all that stuff or whatever. Oh my gosh, very funny. Anyway, that's it for today. You guys take care. We'll see you in the next installment, okay?